Hello and welcome to Ratefinity video tutorials. Today we are going to show you how to create a price rule. A price rule is a set of mandatory rules to be followed in order to create a customer deck. To access this feature, please click on Price Rules and then on the Rules item. By separating these rules from the decks themselves, we want to encourage reuse. For example, you might want to have a conversational deck, a dialer deck, an international deck under different tiers. Let's say a retail tier and a high volume tier. Normally you will have to create 6 sets of rules. With this, you only need to create 2, one for the retail and one for the high volume decks. Let's create a new price rule. On the General tab, you'll find the settings that identify the rule. Let's give it a code, a name, and an optional description. Let's go to the Markup tab. All properties here affect how prices are created. First, the markup percentage. This is going to be the percentage of the price of your provider deck. The final price of the route will be the sum of this markup and the original amount of your provider. When a rate deck is created, Ratefinity will order the compatible prices for each dial code in an increasing order in a set. Let's call it set A. Then you can select on which element of set A you will apply the markup, which is our next setting. Ratefinity will do this process for each dial code. In this example, we will apply the 25% markup on the third cheapest route for each dial code. Apply limits. If set to yes, the next 2 limits will be applied. Minimum markup. Sometimes you will have really cheap routes, depending on the destination. The markup won't be enough to cover your costs. That means servers, personnel, etc. You have most likely analyzed such costs and now have a minimum amount of money you want to make per minute. You can add that amount here, and Ratefinity will make sure that this amount is always covered. Max markup. On the contrary, if there are some really expensive routes, the markup will be created at a really expensive price, which you won't be able to compete easily. The max markup will make sure that prices won't be too high. And finally, main global price. If set, this will make sure that all your prices won't be lower than the value in here. The settings in the Coverage tab will guarantee that you have enough coverage in order to create high ASR decks. There are sometimes decks that have really good prices, much lower than any other provider. You will, of course, want to take advantage of that. There are in some instances where the cheap providers have limited availability of channels, so not all your calls will pass through. In these cases, you need to go to a more expensive route, even if you take less money. So you can always create a high enough markup, but this tends to ruin the pricing on some regions while benefiting others. To make sure this doesn't happen, Ratefinity added the coverage settings. The first setting, mean providers, will make sure that you have always a high enough provider to cover the number of providers in here. This will make sure that you don't take any losses. Next, the markup. The markup in here will only take effect if the price set by your main markup is not enough to cover the price of the most expensive route. Same rules apply. You'll have a max limit on how much that markup should add to the price. You can set the max markup here. In this example, you will have at least 4 providers. So if the initial price you created on the Markup tab does not cover 4 providers, Ratefinity will take the price of the 4th route, add 5%, and make sure that the 5% has a limit of 1 cent. Finally, we have the North American Numbering Plan tab. Here you can select how the jurisdictional indeterminate prices will be calculated. Normal mode will create prices from the indeterminate prices of the providers. Interrate will copy the inter prices to the indeterminate prices. Same thing with intra, but with the intra prices. And use highest will use the highest price for each route of the inter or intra. Let's click on Save Changes and your rule will be ready to be used on your customer decks. Thank you for watching and have a great day.